Welcome to Midweek Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. My name is Jen Higgins Newman, and I'm the program manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House, which is a Quaker center for learning and action and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. Tonight, we have Phoebe with Bringing Work Home with Us. So in a best case scenario, our day jobs can be a source of spiritual renewal, deeper connection to our bodies and surroundings, and a medium through which to serve our communities. But more often than not, our pay the bills jobs also create bitterness, resentment, hurt, and spiritual blockages. Without attempting to offer any cure-alls for the ways capitalism and the ethic of American individualism harms us and limit our connection to the divine in our spiritual communities, Phoebe will be using this midweek to share her practice of building personally meaningful labor into her daily routines and to create a dialogue about the work that renews and impassions us when we are fatigued beyond the help of resting. Sometimes self-care is working more, and sometimes working more is just learning more, living more, and listening more deeply. Now, I'm excited to introduce you to Phoebe. An agricultural worker and occasional digital artist, Phoebe was raised at Friends Meeting at Cambridge and in the NEYM youth programs before attending Guilford College. She has worked in livestock, vegetable, dairy, and timber production, as well as doing food systems education and activism. So again, welcome. We're happy that you've joined us. And Phoebe, it's all yours.
Thank you. And thank you guys for being here tonight. I was telling Jen this is probably my 8th time ever being on Zoom. So I'm excited to be here. I feel a little nervous. And I can't wait to talk about this stuff with you guys. I have a practice to share with you all today surrounding hard feelings that come with being a working person in the world. And I mentioned this in the description that Jen just read to us, but it feels important just to state again that there are some really, really violent, hurtful things going on in labor and going on in our daily lives, in our day jobs. There's very real exploitation and harm being caused that is beyond the scope of any kind of like personal spiritual practice that I can offer. And I want to acknowledge that that's so real. And I felt it. And I hold the space for that. And this is not gonna really be what that's about. This is more of a small scale, daily check-in level sort of thing that I do for myself, that I hope that you can relate to and that we can talk a little bit about together. But I just wanted to say that one more time to reiterate. So I'm an agricultural worker. I work on farms. I work in greenhouses. I work with livestock and with timber, like Jen read in my biography. And from the first time I ever did any work like that, I loved it so much and had this very clear feeling of like having a calling. And that is such a privilege and feels like such a gift. And in so many ways, it's carried me along through like really hard physical work and through really tough, challenging circumstances. And this feeling of getting to be a servant to my community, providing something super necessary, super essential, while also like taking care of the literal land that everything you know is built on. That's so powerful. And it's so good. And it is not enough to free me from the feelings of like bitterness and just like grumpiness and resentment and all these other things of like just the things that come with being a woman in the trades or being a customer facing service person or working in low skill manual labor, which is essentially what it boils down to when you're a farmer. Even though you think I've built all these skills, at the end of the day, that is what I do. And parts of that, it just never starts to feel better. It feels really hard. And so the practice I want to share with you all today, I think people from all different types of jobs, because people who work in offices, people who work in childcare, people who work anywhere, there's these small everyday trials and tribulations that we all are having to deal with that just don't feel any better, no matter how many years you do them. And that's my intro. So let's get into it. Every job I've ever had, there has been like cycles of like starting out being super excited and fresh, and then that's sort of slowly wearing off as you go through it. But several years ago, when I was working on a farm in Maine, attending Quaker meeting up there, I got into this phase where it was just, I was so tired and so like just overworked in every way, like emotionally, physically, in my relationships, that I felt myself like transforming in a way I'd never felt before, where it felt for all the world like I was turning into like a little pebble. Like I felt totally smooth, like totally without any edges or like rough parts, and everything that was happening around me just like passed over me. Like I was just like sitting on the bottom of a river, totally inert, not having any reactions to anything, because I was so tired and expending so much energy just in my day job. The spiritual blockage that I felt was so distressing. I would go to meeting because that was part of my routine. And I'd sit there and whatever anyone was saying was just kind of like washing over me, like nothing was sticking. I wasn't having like emotional reactions or responses to what my community members were sharing. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know why it was bothering me so much, because clearly it was a phase. I didn't feel like that before. I probably wouldn't feel like it afterwards. But it just kept chafing at me in this way that I couldn't quit. And as I kept thinking about it, it persisted for months and months and months, this feeling of being just like totally unreactive to stimulus, just like only preparing myself for the next day ahead at work. Like all the energy I had to go towards being ready for tomorrow. And it's like, why does it bother me so much? This is a normal way to live. People just like, you go to work and then you go to work the next day. That's normal. But there was just some part of me that was like, I don't want to live like this. And another part of me that was like, even though as deadened and dull as I feel right now in this state, I can't help but notice that no one else is feeling the same way. There are so many people. I was working alongside people for 8, 10, 12 hours a day who were going home and doing like 20 hobbies, who were going home and taking care of their huge families. People who were like 60, 65 years older than me were doing all this same work joyfully and going home and like making a big dinner afterwards. And I felt just so like exhausted. I didn't know what to do. But that was kind of a clue. I felt like that perhaps part of the onus of this is on me, and it's not entirely the fault of the environment that I'm in. Like part of this is my approach to being involved in this work that I'm doing. And as I started thinking about it more and more, I thought, what if I just copy these folks? Like, what if I just tried copying how these like successful farmers around me are living their lives and see if that does anything for me? And I started trying to like pick up little jobs here and there. Like I got a bunch of houseplants. I started sewing my pants up. I started like polishing my shoes and buying leather boots and stuff. I started like trying to repair my furniture, just like little things where I'd go home and have a task that I did. Because that's what I was watching people around me doing. Like I had coworkers who were like training for marathons, or who were quilting, or who were doing all this different, like really intensive stuff. Whew. So I started a little bit easier. But something I noticed almost immediately was that when I was going home, not just to like rest, like to lay down and not think and not do anything particularly, I was feeling tired all day into the next day. Like it wasn't a rest that was giving anything to me. But as I started this process of like doing small little extra jobs off the clock, I was noticing like some of that feeling of just being a little pebble, like almost immediately starting to wear away. I was like asking people questions. I was going out and seeking advice. I was coming into work with questions and like engaging a little bit more with my environment and the people around me. It kind of culminated with like I was farming full time, and I started my own very small business, raising meat rabbits for meat and for fur. It was something I'd never done before and had no experience with, but I was kind of hungry for that feeling of like doing work, like exerting myself and getting some kind of return from it emotionally. And with that project, I just felt myself opening back up again in a way that I had wanted so badly before, where things that had felt like, oh, too much work, like, oh, I'm too tired for this or for that, just like, I can't wait to get home and like work on my project and take care of my animals and accomplish the jobs that I've set for myself. This process of adding like that personal generative work, that like work outside of the idea of monetary value, for me was so enriching. And it actually gave me enough energy, just like in those short periods after work hours, that I had enough left over to bring into work the next day. And like the relationships that I was having that were so hard, or that I felt so bad in, I had a little bit of energy to be putting towards them. And a little bit of energy to be like slightly more understanding, or like a little bit more go with the flow, a little bit less resentful of like having to do the things that had to be done. So the first part of my practice is that, and I think it's something that literally every human being does. I was trying to describe this to a friend just a couple of days ago, my topic for today, and they were like, your midweek is just about having hobbies, like the value of having hobbies. But there's like a second part, but I think a lot of it is that, like that idea of it actually is really, really valuable to have work that you just do for yourself. Because I think if I've learned anything from these farmers, these like veteran farmers who are 70, 80 years old, who go to work every single day, it's that living and working are the same word. There's not actually a real difference. Like your day job is one type of work. That is only one part of your life. But all of being alive is working. You have to work to keep yourself fed. You have to work to rest the right amount. You have to work to keep your teeth from falling out of your head. Like all of it's work. And so when I don't know why that was such a revelation for me. I think it's because I was raised in the city. I don't know. People in the city are like, you work to retire, that working for the end of work. But it was so revolutionary for me. And it helped me so much, the idea of like, I could be the one that adds value into my life. Like it doesn't have to wait for my job to suddenly be perfect, because I don't think that day is going to come anytime soon if this pattern holds true. But so that was the first part, this idea of like adding the generative, purely personal labor, that adding to your environment, enriching your own environment and your own life for your own sake, like not for the sake of being able to go to work tomorrow. That never cut it for me. But this idea that every moment of being alive is doing some type of work or another gave me enough perspective to when I was at my day job, which felt really challenging in a lot of ways. I could say like, this is one kind of work. Right now, it doesn't feel really good. But it's actually just like a piece of a larger part, a larger whole. And there are things that I can learn from what's happening to me right now. There are things I can learn from the way that I'm being, the way that I'm showing up to this right now, that can actually aid me not only in my like home time work, but in like making this situation slightly better for me overall. So that's my part one. There's a second part of my practice, which is something that I do more just like during the day, over the course of the day, which is that no matter how much like personally generative work or hobbies or whatever I've ever accumulated at one time, it has never solved the issue that sometimes someone speaks to you in a really shitty way, or sometimes something is really unfair, or sometimes you've already shoveled manure for 2 hours, but it is not done, and you will have to do it for 2 hours more. And there's not, like, that's just how it is, and that feels bad. The practice is that I don't think that I can make myself stop feeling resentful. I don't think I'm enlightened enough to like remove the like kind of selfish, self-pitying parts of me. And sometimes the righteously upset parts of myself. I can't remove that from my experience, at least not yet where I'm at. So the second part has been like using my work with my hobbies outside of the 9 to 5, and with all these like all this time I've spent thinking about what it feels like to be engaged in my life as a life of work, and having little touch points when I'm feeling really bad on the job. I think about it kind of like if you've seen the movie Inception, they test if they're in a dream state or not by there's a little token, like a little top that they spin, and that shows if you're in real life or in the dream. I think I've kind of gotten myself to the point where I'll be having like a thought of like, oh, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be here, I don't like this, I'm not good enough to be able to do what I'm trying to do right now, blah blah blah. And it triggers like it like flips a switch in my brain where it's like, oh, Inception moment, like testing the waters of this feeling right now. Not to like try and make myself stop having those hard feelings, but just to be like, oh, a conflict within my day job environment. That reminds me, life is work, work is life. Like I'm part of this much larger creation, like this divine earth where everything around me is just the physical manifestation of the divine. Wow, like just a zoom out moment. There's a chance for a zoom out moment when those thoughts pop up now, because of the ways that I've been thinking so much about the way I want to be while I'm working. A lot of times I'm too upset to fully appreciate maybe the depth of that sentiment. But there is a Thomas Kelly quote that I want to read to you all before we break out into small groups that just speaks to that idea of like every single second is a second you could be fully connected to God, like to the divine, to be in a complete like feedback cycle with the eternal. Like every single second is an opportunity for that. And when I was feeling so much like a stone, and in those moments in my day-to-day life where I go back a little bit to feeling that like closed off, stubborn, like overexerted way, this practice of like, oh, this is a familiar thought. I've had this thought before. This is actually an opportunity to remember something that I've learned to be true. That practice, I feel like is a way that brings me closer to that concept that Kelly is talking about. That practice that one day, like if we're very lucky and very, very consistent, brings you to a sort of like continuous conversation with God. I don't think that in this lifetime I'm on track to get there, but it's something to strive for. That's some work outside of the 9 to 5 to be focusing on. Maybe one final note on just the attitude shift that I kind of felt when I was in that most like closed off state, and that I think has helped me a lot, and is one of the things I definitely think about when I am having that spinning the top moment, is that before, what I thought that I deserved, like what I thought that I deserved as someone who works hard, is for things to be easier. But what I think I actually probably deserve is to be challenged within the scope of my ability. And that's a whole different way of looking at things. Because when you're at a job that doesn't challenge you at all, I've been there, that's no good. But it's very attractive when you feel so at wit's end to just want things to be just a little easier, a little softer, just a little bit more restful. But that rest doesn't come if we aren't like building a life that generates space for not just investing in our future and our day-to-day, but also in like emotionally regulating and like getting a balance where things can be bad, but they get good again as well. So with that, here's two quotes by two very, very brilliant people. One of them is Thomas Kelly. This is an excerpt from his book, A Testament of Devotion. And I'm going to read the section about holy blindness, the idea that there's a state, like there's a possibility where every single second is spent directly with God. It's from his chapter on humility and holiness. Humility rests upon a holy blindedness, like the blindedness of him who looks steadily into the sun. For wherever he turns his eyes on earth, there he sees only the sun. The God-blinded soul sees not of self, not of personal degradation or of personal eminence, but only the holy will working impersonally through him, through others, as one objective life and power. But what trinkets we have sought after in life, the pursuit of what petty trifles has wasted our years as we have ministered to the enhancement of our own little selves. And what needless anguishes we have suffered because our little selves were defeated, were not flattered, were not cozied and petted. But the blinding God blots out this self and gives humility and true selfhood as wholly full of him. That's a big one for me that I think about all the time. And in quite a different note, I do have just one short excerpt from Octavia Butler's book, The Parable of the Sower, from the fictional text, The Book of the Living, from that series, in which the main premise is that God is change. And this is a short verse called Positive Obsession, which is about the role of work in the relationship with God. So she says, God is change, and in the end, God prevails. But meanwhile, a sweet and powerful positive obsession blunts pain, diverts rage, and engages each of us in the most intense of our chosen struggles. So with those two, I am very interested to know in what non 9-to-5 ways you shine in your work